Welcome to Sniper's Rest. Sniper's Rest is the last best rest stop in the here and there, the place between where you're coming from and where you're going. Welcome, my friend. I hope this week finds you well. Come in, take a load off. Frank! Quit sniffing our traveler friend. Goodness me, you'd think you'd been working on a farm all day. Oh, you have? Oh, that explains it then. Frank loves his veggies. I am Sniper Shadow, and I reside here in Sniper's Rest as a guide and custodian to those who pass through here. I visit the worlds within the multiverse often, but I am always here to guide and care for the travelers such as yourself that pass through the here and there. Please take a rest here before continuing your journey. Today we continue A Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. Last we left off, Axel had been separated from his uncle and their Icelandic guide, Hans. He was very shakily off in their direction before he lost consciousness. Will he find them again? I am desperate to find out, my friend, so let's get into it. Chapter 29. Thalata. When I came to myself, I was stretched in half-darkness, covered with thick coats and blankets. My uncle was watching over me to discover the least sign of life. At my first sigh, he took my hand, and when I opened my eyes, he uttered a cry of joy. "He lives! He lives!" he cried. "Yes, I am still alive," I answered feebly. "My dear nephew," said my uncle, pressing me to his breast, "you are saved!" I was deeply touched with the tenderness of his manner as he uttered these words, and still more with the care with which he watched over me. But such trials were wanted to bring out the professor's tender qualities. At this moment Hans came. He saw my hand in my uncle's, and I may safely say that there was joy in his countenance. "Goddag," said he. "How do you do, Hans? How are you? And now, uncle, tell me, where are we at the present moment?" "Tomorrow, Axel, tomorrow. You are too faint and weak. I have bandaged your head with compresses which must not be disturbed. Sleep now, and tomorrow I will tell you all." "But do tell me what time it is, and what day." "It is Sunday, the 8th of August, and it is 10 at night. You must ask me no more questions until the 10th. In truth, I was very weak, and my eyes involuntarily closed. I wanted a good night's rest, and therefore went off to sleep with the knowledge that I had been 4 long days alone in the heart of the earth. Next morning, on awakening, I looked round me. My couch, made up of all our travelling gear, was in a charming grotto adorned with splendid stalactites, and the soil of which was a fine sand. It was half light. There was no torch, no lamp, yet certain mysterious glimpses of light came from without through a narrow opening in the grotto. I too heard a vague and indistinct noise, something like the murmuring of waves breaking upon a shingly shore, and at times I seemed to hear the whistling of wind. I wondered whether I was awake, whether I was dreaming, whether my brain, crazed by my fall, was not affected by imaginary noises. Yet neither eyes nor ears could be so utterly deceived. It is a ray of daylight, I thought, sliding in through the cleft in the rock. That is indeed the murmuring of waves. That is the rustling noise of wind. Am I quite mistaken, or have we returned to the surface of the earth? Has my uncle given up in the expedition, or is it happily terminated? I was asking myself these unanswerable questions when the professor entered. "Good morning, Axel," he cried cheerfully. "I feel sure you are better." "Yes, I am indeed," I said, sitting up on my couch. "You can hardly fail to be better, for you have slept quietly. Hans and I have watched you by turns, and we have noticed you are evidently recovering." "Indeed, I do feel a great deal better, and I will give you proof of that presently, if you will let me have my breakfast.
You shall eat, lad. The fever has left you. Hans rubbed your wounds with some ointment or other, of which the Icelanders keep the secret, and they have healed marvellously. Our hunter is a splendid fellow.
Whilst he went on talking, my uncle prepared a few provisions, which I devoured eagerly, notwithstanding his advice to the contrary. All the while I was overwhelming him with questions, which he answered readily. Then I learned that my providential fall had brought me exactly to the extremity of an almost perpendicular shaft, and as I had landed in the midst of an accompanied torrent of stones, the least of which would have been enough to crush me, the conclusion was a loose portion of rock had come down with me. This frightful conveyance had thus carried me into the arms of my uncle, where I fell bruised, bleeding, and insensible.
Truly, it is wonderful that you have not been killed 100 times over. But for the love of God, don't ever let us separate again, or we may never see each other more.
Not separate? Is the journey not over, then? I opened a pair of astonished eyes, which immediately called for the question.
What is the matter, Axel?
I have a question to ask you. You say that I am safe and sound.
No doubt you are.
And my limbs are all unbroken.
Certainly.
And my head?
Your head, except for a few bruises, is all right, and it is on your shoulders, where it ought to be.
Well, I'm afraid my brain is affected.
Your mind affected?
Yes, I fear so. Are we again on the surface of the globe?
No, certainly not.
Then I must be mad, for don't I see the light of day, and don't I hear the wind blowing and the sea breaking on the shore?
Ah, is that all?
Do tell me about it.
I can't explain the inexplainable, but you will soon see and understand that geology has not yet learnt all it has to learn.
Well, let us go then, I answered quickly.
No, Axel, the open air might be bad for you.
Open air?
Yes, the wind is rather strong. You must not expose yourself.
But I assure you I am perfectly well.
A little patience, my nephew. A relapse might get us into trouble, and we have no time to lose, for the voyage may be a long one.
The voyage?
Yes. Rest today, and tomorrow we will set sail.
Set sail? And I almost leaped up. What did it all mean? Had we a river, a lake, a sea to depend on? Was there a ship at our disposal in some underground harbour? My curiosity was highly excited, and my uncle vainly tried to restrain me. When he saw that my impatience was doing me harm, he yielded. I dressed in haste. For greater safety I wrapped myself in a blanket, and came out of the grotto. Chapter 30. A new Mare Internum. At first I could hardly see anything. My eyes, unaccustomed to the light, quickly closed. When I was able to reopen them, I stood more stupefied than even surprised. "The sea!" I cried.
Yes, my uncle replied, the Lidenbrock Sea, and I don't suppose any other discoverer will ever dispute my claim to name it after myself as its first discoverer.
A vast sheet of water, the commencement of a lake or an ocean, spread far away beyond the range of the eye, reminding me forcibly of that open sea which drew from Xenophon's 10,000 Greeks, and after their long retreat, the simultaneous cry, "Thalata, Thalata, the sea, the sea." The deeply indented shore was lined with a breadth of fine shining sand, softly lapped by the waves, and strewn with small shells which had been inhabited by the first created beings. The waves broke on this shore with the hollow echoing murmur peculiar to vast enclosed spaces. A light foam flew over the waves before the breath of a moderate breeze, and some of the spray fell upon my face. On this slightly inclining shore, about 100 fathoms from the limit of the waves, came down the foot of a huge wall of vast cliffs, which rose majestically to an enormous height. Some of these, dividing the beach with their sharp spurs, formed capes and promontories, worn away by the ceaseless action of the surf. Farther on, the eye discerned the massive outline sharply defined against the hazy distant horizon. It was quite an ocean, with irregular shores of earth, but desert and frightfully wild in appearance. If my eyes were able to range afar over this great sea, it was because a peculiar light brought to view every detail of it. It was not the light of the sun, with its dazzling shafts of brightness and the splendor of his rays, nor was it the pale and uncertain shimmer of the moonbeams, the dim reflection of a nobler body of light. No, the illuminating power of this light, its trembling diffusiveness, its bright, clear whiteness, its low temperature, showed that it must be of electric origin. It was like an aurora borealis, a continuous cosmical phenomenon, filling the cave of sufficient extent to contain an ocean. The vault that spanned the space above, the sky, if it could be called so, seemed composed of vast plains of cloud, shifting and variable vapors, which by their condensation must at times fall in torrents of rain. I should have thought that under so powerful a pressure of the atmosphere there could be no evaporation, and yet under a law unknown to me there were broad tracts of vapor suspended in the air. But then the weather was fine. The play of the electric light produced singular effects upon the upper strata of cloud. Deep shadows reposed upon their lower reefs, and often, between two separated fields of clouds, there glided down a ray of unspeakable lustre. But it was not solar light, and there was no heat. The general effect was sad, supremely melancholy. Instead of the shining firmament spangled with its innumerable stars shining singly or in clusters, I felt that all these subdued and shaded lights were ribbed in by vast walls of granite, which seemed to overpower me with their weight, and that all this space, as great as it was, would not be enough for the march of the humblest of satellites. Then I remembered the theory of an English captain who likened the earth to a vast hollow sphere, in the interior of which the air became luminous because of the vast pressure that weighed upon it, while two stars, Pluto and Proserpine, rolled within upon the circuit of their mysterious orbits. We were in reality shut up inside an immeasurable excavation. Its width could not be estimated, since the shore ran widening as far as the eye could reach, nor could its length for the dim horizon bound the new. As for its height, it must have been several leagues. Where this vault rested upon its granite base no eye could tell, but there was a cloud hanging far above, the height of which we estimated at 12,000 feet, a greater height than that of any terrestrial vapor, and no doubt due to the great density of the air. The word cavern does not convey any idea of the immense space. The words of human tongue are inadequate to describe the discoveries of him who ventures into the deep abysses of the earth. Besides, I could not tell upon which geological theory to account for the existence of such an excavation. Had the cooling of the globe produced it? I knew of several celebrated caverns from the descriptions of travellers, but I had never heard of any such dimensions as this. If the grotto of Gagacha in Colombia, visited by Humboldt, had not given up the whole secret of its depth to the philosopher who investigated it into the depth of 2,500 feet, it probably did not extend much farther. The immense Mammoth Cave in Kentucky is of gigantic proportions, since its vaulted roof rises 500 feet above the level of an unfathomable lake, and travelers have explored its ramifications to the extent of 40 miles. But what were these cavities compared to in which I stood with wonder and admiration, with its sky of luminous vapors, its bursts of electric light, and a vast sea filling its bed? My imagination felt powerless before such immensity. I gazed upon these wonders in silence. Words failed me. to express my feelings. I felt as if I was in some distant planet, Uranus or Neptune, and in the presence of a phenomena which my terrestrial experience gave me no cognizance. For such novel sensations, new words were wanted, and my imagination failed to supply them. I gazed, I thought, I admired with a stupefaction mingled with a certain amount of fear. The unforeseen nature of this spectacle brought back the color to my cheeks. I was under a new course of treatment with the aid of astonishment, and my convalescence was promoted by this novel system of therapeutics. Besides, the dense and breezy air invigorated me, supplying more oxygen to my lungs. It will be easily conceived that after an imprisonment of 47 days in a narrow gallery with the height of a physical enjoyment to breathe moist air impregnated with saline particles, I was delighted to leave my dark grotto. My uncle, already familiar with these wonders, had ceased to feel surprise.
"You feel strong enough to walk a little way now?" he asked.
Yes, certainly, and nothing could be more delightful.
"Well, take my arm, Axel, and let us follow the windings of the shore."
I eagerly accepted, and we began to coast along this new sea. On the left, huge pyramids of rock, piled one upon another, produced a prodigious titanic effect. Down their sides flowed numberless waterfalls, which went on their way in brawling but pellucid streams. A few light vapors, leaping from rock to rock, detonated the place of hot springs, and streams flowed softly down to the common basin, gliding down the gentle slopes with a soft murmur. Amongst these streams I recognized our faithful little travelling companion, the Hansbach, coming to lose its volume quietly in the mighty sea, just as if it had done nothing else since the beginning of the world. "We shall see to it no more," I said with a sigh.
"What matters," replied the philosopher, "whether this or another serves to guide us?"
I thought him rather ungrateful. But at that moment my attention was drawn to an unexpected sight. At a distance of 500 paces, at the turn of a high promontory, appeared a high, tufted, dense forest. It was composed of trees of moderate height, formed like umbrellas, with exact geometrical outlines. The current winds seemed to have no effect upon their shape, and in the midst of the windy blast they stood unmoved and firm, just like a clump of petrified cedars. I hastened forward. I could not give any name to these singular creations. They were some of 200,000 species of vegetables known hitherto, and did they claim their place of their own in this lustrine flora? No, when we arrived under their shade, my surprise turned to admiration. There stood before me productions of earth, but of gigantic stature, which my uncle immediately named.
"It is only a forest of mushrooms,"
said he, and he was right. Imagine the large development attained by these plants, which prefer a warm, moist climate. I knew that the Lepidon gynaeranum attains, according to Bulliard, a circumference of 8 or 9 feet, but here were pale mushrooms 30 to 40 feet high, and crowned with a cap of equal diameter. There they stood in thousands. No light could penetrate between their huge cones, and complete darkness reigned beneath those giants. They formed settlements of domes, placed in close array, like the round thatched roofs of a Central African city. Yet I wanted to penetrate farther underneath, though a chill fell upon me as soon as I came under those cellular vaults. For half an hour we wandered from side to side in the damp shades, and it was a comfortable and pleasant change to arrive once more upon the sea shore. But the subterranean vegetation was not confined to these fungi. Farther on rose groups of tall trees of colorless foliage, and easy to recognize. They were the lowly shrubs of earth, here attaining gigantic size. Lycopodiums, 100 feet high, the huge sigillaria, found in our coal mines, tree ferns as tall as our fir trees in the northern latitudes, lepidodendra with cylindrical forked stems, terminated by long leaves and bristling with rough hairs like those of the cactus.
Wonderful! Magnificent! Splendid! Cried my uncle. Here is the entire flora of the second period of the world, the transition period. These humble garden plants with us were tall trees in the early ages. Look, Axel, and admire it all. Never had a botanist such a feast as this.
You are right, my uncle. Providence seems to have preserved in this immense conservatory the antediluvian plants which the wisdom of the philosophers had so sagaciously put together again.
It is a conservatory, Axel, but is it not also a menagerie?
Surely not a menagerie.
Yes, no doubt of it. Look at that dust under your feet. See the bones scattered on the ground?
So there are, I cried. Bones of extinct animals. I had rushed up upon these remains, formed of indestructible phyllosites of lime, and without hesitation I named these monstrous bones, which lay scattered about like decayed trunks of trees. Here is the lower jaw of a mastodon, I said, and these are the molar teeth of a Diotherium. This femur must have belonged to a great beast, the Megatherium. It is certainly a menagerie, for these remains were not brought here by a deluge. These animals, which they belonged, roamed the shores of this subterranean sea, under the shade of those arborescent trees. Here are skeletons. And yet I cannot understand the appearance of these quadrupeds in a granite cavern.
Why?
Because animal life existed upon the earth only in the secondary period, when a sediment of soil had been deposited by the rivers and taken place of the incandescent rocks of the primitive period.
Well, Axel, there is a very simple answer to your objection that this soil is alluvial.
What? At such a depth below the surface of the earth?
No doubt, and there is a geological explanation of that fact. At a certain period the earth consisted only of the elastic crust or bark, alternately acted on by forces from above or below, according to the laws of attraction and gravitation. Probably there were substances of the outer crust when a portion of the sedimentary deposits were carried down sudden openings.
That may be, I replied. But if there have been creatures now extinct in these underground regions, why may not some of those monsters be now roaming through these gloomy forests, or hidden behind the steep crags? As this unpleasant notion got a hold of me, I surveyed with anxious scrutiny these open spaces before me, but no living creature appeared upon the barren strand. I felt rather tired, and went to sit down at the end of the promontory, at the foot of which the waves came, but beat themselves into spray. Thence my eye could sweep every part of the bay. Within its extremity a little harbour was formed between the pyramidal cliffs, where the still waters slept untouched by boisterous winds. A brig and 2 or 3 schooners might have moored within it safely. I almost fancied I should presently see some ship issue from it, full sail, and take to the open sea under the southern breeze. But this illusion lasted a very short time. We were the only living creatures in this subterranean world. When the wind lulled, a deeper silence than that of deserts fell upon the arid, naked rocks, and weighed upon the surface of the ocean. I then desired to pierce the distant haze, and to rend asunder the mysterious curtain that hung across the horizon. Anxious queries arose to my lips. Where did that sea terminate? Where did it lead to? Should we ever know anything about its opposite shores? My uncle made no doubt about it at all. I both desired and feared. After spending an hour in the contemplation of this marvellous spectacle, we returned to the shore to regain the grotto, and I fell asleep in the midst of the strangest thoughts. Chapter 31. Preparations for a voyage of discovery. The next morning I awoke feeling perfectly well. I thought a bathe would do me good, and I went to plunge for a few minutes into the waters of this Mediterranean Sea, for assuredly it better deserved this name than any other sea. I came back to breakfast with a good appetite. Hans was a good caterer for our little household. He had water and fire at his disposal, so that he was able to vary our bill of fare now and then. For dessert he gave us a few cups of coffee, and never was coffee so delicious.
Now,
Said my uncle.
now it is time for high tide, and we must not lose the opportunity to study this phenomenon.
What? The tide? I cried. Can the influence of the sun and moon be felt down here?
Why not? Are all the bodies subject throughout their mass to the power of universal attraction? This mass of water cannot escape the general law, and in spite of the heavy atmospheric pressure on the surface, you will see it rise like the Atlantic itself.
At the moment we reached the sand on the shore, and the waves were by slow degrees encroaching on the shore. Here is the tide rising, I cried.
Yes, Axel, and judging by these ridges of foam, you may observe that the sea will rise about 12 feet.
This is wonderful, I said.
No, it is quite natural.
You may say so, uncle, but to me it is most extraordinary, and I can hardly believe my eyes. Who would ever have imagined under this terrestrial crust an ocean with ebbing and flowing tides, with winds and storms?
Well, replied my uncle, is there any scientific reason against it?
No, I see none, as soon as the theory of central heat is given up.
So then, thus far, he answered, the theory of Sir Humphrey Davy is confirmed.
Evidently it is, and now there is no reason why there should not be seas and continents in the interior of the earth.
No doubt, said my uncle, and inhabited too.
To be sure, said I. And why should not these waters yield to us fishes of unknown species?
At any rate, he replied, we have not seen any yet.
Well, let us make some lines and see if the bait will draw here as it does on the sun-blurry regions.
We will try, Axel, for we must penetrate all secrets of these new discovered regions.
But what are we, uncle? For I have not asked yet you that question, and your instruments must be able to furnish the answer.
Horizontally, 350 leagues from Iceland.
So much as that?
I am sure, not being a mile out of my reckoning.
And does the compass still show southeast?
Yes, with a westerly deviation of 90 degrees 45 minutes, just as above ground. As it is dip, for curious fact coming to light, which I have observed carefully, that the needle, instead of dipping towards the pole as in the northern hemisphere, on the contrary, rises from it.
Would you then conclude, I said, that the magnetic pole is somewhere between the surface of the globe and the point where we are?
Exactly so, and it is likely enough that if we were to reach the spot beneath the polar regions, that about 71st degree where St. James Ross had discovered the magnetic pole to be situated, should we see the needle point straight up. Therefore that material centre of attraction is at no great depth.
I remarked, it is so, and here is a fact which science has scarcely suspected.
Science, my lad, has been built upon many errors, but they are errors which it was good to fall into, for they lead to the truth.
What depth have we now reached?
We are 35 leagues below the surface.
So, I said, examining the map, the highlands of Scotland are over our heads, and the Grampians are raising their rugged summits above us.
Yes, answered the professor, laughing. It is rather a heavy weight to bear, but a solid arc spans over our head. The great architect has built it of the best material, and never could man have given it so wide a stretch. What are the finest arches of bridges and the arcades of cathedrals compared to this far-reaching vault, with a radius of 3 leagues, beneath which wide and tempest-tossed oceans may flow at ease?
Oh, I am not afraid that it will fall down upon my head. But now what are your plans? Are you not thinking of returning to the surface now?
Return? No, indeed. We will continue our journey, everything having gone on well so far.
But how are we to get down below this liquid surface?
Oh, I am not going to dive head foremost, but if all the oceans are properly speaking but lakes, since they are encompassed by land, of course this internal sea will be surrounded by a coast of granite, and on the opposite shores we will find fresh passage openings.
How long do you suppose this sea to be?
30 or 40 leagues, so we have no time to lose, and we shall set sail tomorrow.
I looked about for a ship. Set sail, shall we? But I should like to see my boat first.
It will need no boat at all, but a good, well-made raft.
Why, I said, a raft would be just as hard to make as a boat, and I don't see.
I know you don't see, but if you might hear if you would listen. Don't you hear hammers at work? Hans is busy at it.
What, has he already felled trees?
Oh, the trees were already down. Come and you will see for yourself.
After half an hour's walking, on the other side of the promontory, which formed the little harbour, I perceived Hans at work. In a few more steps I was at his side. To my great surprise, a half-finished raft was already lying on the sand, made of a peculiar kind of wood, and a great number of planks, straight and bent, and of frames, were covering the ground, enough almost for a little fleet. "Uncle, what wood is this?" I cried.
It is fir, pine, or birch, or some northern conifer mineralized by the action of the sea. It is called sturtebrand, a variety of brown coal, or lingite, found chiefly in Iceland.
But surely then, like other fossil wood, it must be hard as stone and cannot float.
Sometimes that may happen, but some of these woods become true anthracites. But others, such as this, have only gone through the first stage of the fossil transformation. Just look,
added my uncle, throwing into the sea one of the precious waifs. The bit of wood, after disappearing, returned to the surface and oscillated to and fro with the waves.
Are you convinced?
Said my uncle. I am quite convinced, although it is incredible. By the next evening, thanks to the industry and skill of our guide, the raft was made. It was 10 feet by 5, the planks of sturtebrand, braced strongly together with cords, presented an even surface, and when launched this improvised vessel floated easily upon the waves of the Lidenbrock Sea. Chapter 32. Wonders of the Deep. On the 13th of August we awoke early. We were now to begin to adopt a mode of travelling, both more expeditious and less fatiguing than hitherto. A mast was made of the 2 poles, spliced together, a yard was made of a third, and a blanket borrowed from our coverings made a tolerable sail. There was no want of cordage for the rigging, and everything was well and firmly made. The provisions, baggage, instruments, guns, and a good quantity of fresh water from the rocks around all found their proper places on board, and at 6 the Professor gave his signal to embark. Hans fitted up a rudder to steer his vessel. He took the tiller and unmoored, the sail was set, and we were soon afloat. At the moment of leaving the harbour, my uncle, who tenaciously fond of naming his new discoveries, wanted to give it a name, and proposed mine amongst others. But I have better to propose, I said. Gräuben. Let it be called Port Gräuben. It will look very well upon the map.
Port Gräuben let it be, then.
And so the cherished remembrance of my Veronese became associated with our venturous expedition. The wind was from the northwest. We went with it at a high rate of speed. The dense atmosphere acted with great force and impelled us swiftly on. In an hour my uncle had been able to estimate our progress. At this rate, he said, we shall make 30 leagues in 24 hours, and we shall soon come in sight of the opposite shore. I made no answer, but went and sat forward. The northern shore was already beginning to dip under the horizon. The eastern and western strands spread wide as if to bid us farewell. Before our eyes lay far and wide a vast sea. Shadows of great clouds swept heavily over its silver-grey surface, the glistening bluish rays of electric light, here and there reflected by the dancing drops of spray, shot out the little sheaves of light from the track we left in our rear. Soon we lost entirely the sight of land. No object was left for the eye to judge by, and but the frothy track of the raft, I might have thought we were standing still. About 12 immense shoals of seaweed came in sight. I was aware of the great powers of vegetation that characterize these plants, which grow at a depth of 12,000 feet, reproduce themselves under the pressure of 400 atmospheres, and sometimes form barriers strong enough to impede the course of a ship. But never, I think, were such seaweeds as those which we saw floating in immense waving lines upon the sea of Lidenbrock. Our raft skirted the whole length of the fungi, 3 or 4 thousand feet long, undulating like vast serpents beyond the reach of sight. I found some amusement in tracing these endless waves, always thinking I should come to the end of them, and for my hours of patience was vying with my surprise. What natural force could have produced such plants, and what must have been the appearance of the earth in the first ages of its formation, when under the action of heat and moisture the vegetable kingdom alone was developing on its surface. Evening came, as on the previous day. I perceived no change in the luminous condition of the air. It was a constant condition, the permanency of which might be relied upon. After supper I laid myself down at the foot of the mast and fell asleep in the midst of the fantastic reveries. Hans, keeping fast by the helm, let the raft run on, which, after all, needed no steering, the wind blowing directly aft. Since our departure from Port Gräuben, Professor Lidenbrock had entrusted the log to my care. I was to register every observation, make entries of interesting phenomena, the direction of the wind, the rate of sailing, the way we made, in a word, every particular of our single voyage. I shall, therefore, reproduce here these daily notes, written, so to speak, as the course of the events directed, in order to furnish an exact narrative of our passage. Friday, August 14th. Wind steady, northwest. The raft makes rapid way in a direct line. Coast 30 leagues to leeward. Nothing in sight before us. Intensity of light the same. Weather fine, that is to say, that the clouds are flying high, are light, and bathed in a white atmosphere resembling silver in a state of fusion. Thermometer 89 degrees Fahrenheit. At noon Hans prepared a hook at the end of a line. He baited it with a small piece of meat and flung it into the sea. For 2 hours nothing was caught. Are these waters, then, bare of inhabitants? No, there's a pull of the line. Hans draws it in and brings out a struggling fish. "A sturgeon!" I cried. "A small sturgeon!" The Professor eyes the creature attentively, and his opinion differs from mine. The head of the fish was flat, but rounded in the front, and the anterior part of its body was plated with bony angular scales. It had no teeth, its pectoral fins were large, and of tail there was none. The animal belonged to the same order as the sturgeon, but differed from that fish in many essential particulars. After a short examination, my uncle pronounced his opinion.
This fish belongs to an extinct family, of which only fossil traces are found in the Devonian formations.
"What?" I cried. "Have we taken alive an inhabitant of the seas of primitive ages?"
Yes, and you will observe that these fossil fishes have no identity with any living species. To have one in one's possession, a living specimen, is a happy event for a naturalist.
"But to what family does it belong?"
It is of the order of ganoids, of the family of the Cephalopists, and a species of Pechoranthes. But this one displays a peculiarity confined to all fishes that inhabit subterranean waters. It is blind, and not only blind, but actually has no eyes at all."
I looked. Nothing could be more certain. But supposing it might be a solitary case, we baited afresh and threw out our line. Surely this ocean is well peopled with fish, for in another couple of hours we took a large quantity of pericathes, as well as others belonging to the extinct family of the Depetarides, but of which my uncle could not tell the species. None had organs of sight. This unhopped catch recruited our stock of provisions. Thus it is evident that this sea contains none but species known to us in their fossil state, in which fishes as well as reptiles are less perfectly and completely organized the farther back of their date of creation. Perhaps we may yet meet with some of the cerans which science has reconstructed out of a bit of bone or cartilage. I took up the telescope and scanned the whole horizon, and found it everywhere a desert sea. We were far removed from the shores. I gaze upward in the air. Why should not some strange birds, restored by the immortal curvature, again flap their sail-broad vans, in this dense and heavy atmosphere? There are sufficient fish for their support. I surveyed the whole space that stretched overhead. It is as desert as the shore was. Still my imagination carried with me away amongst these wonderful speculations of paleontology. Though awake, I fell into a dream. I thought I could see, floating on the surface of the waters, enormous chelonia, pre-adamant tortoises resembling floating islands. Over the dimly lighted strand there trod the huge mammals of the first ages of the world, the leptotherium, the slender beast, found in the caverns of Brazil, the mecharotherium, the ruminating beast, found in the drift of ice-clad Siberia. Farther on, the Pachydermatous Lopiodon, crested-toothed. A gigantic tapir hides behind the rocks to dispute its prey with an Aplotherium, unarmed beast, a strange creature which seems to compound of horse, rhinoceros, camel, and hippopotamus. The colossal mastodon, nipple-toothed, twists and untwists his trunk, and brays and pounds with his huge tusks the fragments of rocks that cover the shore, whilst the megatherium, huge beast, buttressed upon his enormous hinder paws, grubbed the soil, awaking the sonorous echoes of the granite rocks with his tremendous roarings. Higher up, the Proplothecea, the first monkey that appeared on the globe, climbing up the steep ascents. Higher yet, the pterodite, wing-fingered, darts in irregular zigzags to and fro in the heavy air. In the uppermost regions of the air immense birds, more powerful than the cassowary and larger than the ostrich, spread their vast breadths of wings, and strike with their heads the granite vault that bounds the sky. All this fossil world rises to life again in my vivid imagination. I return to the scriptorial periods or ages of the world, conventionally called days, long before the appearance of man, when the unfinished world was yet unfitted for his support. Then my dream backed even farther, still into the ages before the creation of living beings. The mammals disappear, then the birds vanish, then the reptiles of the secondary period, and finally the fish, the crustaceans, the mollusks, and articulated beings. Then the zoophytes and the transition period also return to nothing. I am the only living thing in the world. All life is concentrated in my beating heart alone. There are no more seasons. Climates are no more. The heat of the globe continually increases and neutralizes that of the sun. Vegetation becomes accelerated. I glide like a shade among the arborescent ferns, treading with unsteady feet the colored marls and the part-colored clays. I lean for support against the trunks of immense conifers. I lie in the shade of Acephanophilia, wedge-leaves, and Asterophilia, star-leaved, and lycopods 100 feet high. Ages seem no more than days. I am passed against my will in retrograde order through the long series of terrestrial changes. Plants disappear, granite rocks soften, intense heat covers the soiled bodies into thick fluids. The waters again cover the face of the earth. They boil, they rise in whirring eddies of streams. White and ghastly mists wrap around their shifting forms of the earth, which by imperceptible degrees dissolves into a gaseous mass, glowing fiery red and white, as large and as shining as the sun. I am then floating myself, with wild caprice, in the midst of this nebulous mass of 1,400,000 times the volume of Earth, into which it will one day be condensed and carried forward amongst the planetary bodies. My body is no longer firm and terrestrial. It is resolved into its constituent atoms, substellized and volatilized. Sublimed into impondable vapor, I mingle and am lost in the endless foods of those vast globular volumes of vaporous mists which roll upon their flaming orbits through infinite space. But is it not a dream? Whither is it carrying me? My feverish hand has vainly attempted to describe upon its paper its strange and wonderful details. I have forgotten everything that surrounds me. The professor, the guide, the raft, are all gone out of my ken. An illusion has laid hold upon me.
"What's the matter?"
My uncle breaks in. My eyes, staring, are fixated vaguely upon him.
"Take care, Axel, or you will fall overboard."
At that moment I felt the sinewy hand of Hans seizing me vigorously, but for him, carried away by my dream, I should have thrown myself into the sea.
"Is he mad?"
cried the professor.
"What is all that about?"
At last I cried, returning to myself.
"Do you feel ill?"
my uncle asked. No, but I had a strange hallucination. It is over now. Is all going on right?
"Yes, it is a fair wind and a fine sea. We are sailing rapidly along, and if I am not out in my reckoning, we shall soon land."
At these words I rose and gazed around upon the horizon, still everywhere bound by clouds alone. That concludes our tale for this week, my friend. Please return next week and we will continue through A Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. If you wish to rest some more, please find a space that suits you, whether you curl up by the fire, partake in some food and beverages in our kitchen, take a nap in one of our many rooms, or take a stroll around the garden. Please know you are always welcome at Sniper's Rest, my friend. If you are continuing your journey, the multiverse is simply bustling with activity today. Happy spooky season, my friend. To the north, your fiancé is missing. He's gone to Eden. You follow. Face an ancient evil that lurks beneath the waves. Hold your breath. And jump. To the west, your mother has gone mad. She wants blood. A sacrifice. The voices tell her your soul is needed to prove her faith. The basement. Run. To the east, welcome to the place between heaven and hell. An unholy law looms and you are simply a pawn in this bloody battle. Your only way out is to purify your soul and kill your pain. Good luck. And if you are making your own way out there, good luck, my friend, wherever you end up. Wherever you come from and wherever you're going. Thank you for spending some time here with us at Sniper's Rest. Remember to take care of yourself, be kind to others, hydrate, take a moment to look out into the world and marvel at how incredible it all is. How incredible you are, friend. Until next time, please take care on your way.